Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live in California, going back to the Beltway on Friday. Looking forward to talking with Leader Mitch McConnell tomorrow about everything that is going on the day after President Zelensky addresses the United States Congress. Salem Media will be carrying the Zelensky address live across our network, and then Mike Gallagher will host a conversation immediately thereafter. That address coming up at 9 a.m. Eastern Time today. I hope you are listening. Ukraine says it has launched a counteroffensive against Russia forces. I've been waiting to see if Ukraine would be able to put out such a press release, and it has happened. Ukraine's armed forces are launching counteroffensives against Russia's forces in several operational areas. The Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak wrote on Twitter on Wednesday, this radically changes the party's dispositions. Reuters is not able to confirm that. Russia, however, says that parts of Ukraine compromise deal are close. And Vladimir Putin says, on the other hand, Kiev is not seriously committed to peace as explosions rock the Ukrainian capital. But Russia says, in the form of their foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, that there's hope for reaching a compromise. That's according to the Financial Times. What does that compromise look like? Not sure. Zelensky himself says the Ukrainian and Russian positions are becoming more realistic. And the counteroffensive, according to the Zelensky advisor, is supposed to help with that. According to the Financial Times as well, the U.S. and the allies are weighing red lines. Now, the unhappy experience of President Obama and red lines is making them go slow. Because when Obama declared a red line and then did not enforce it, it unleashed the whirlwind of genocide in Syria and continued uses of chemical weapons. So NATO doesn't want to be Obama. That's the bottom line. And there's nobody in the White House that wants to be Ben Rhodes, even his former boss, Susan Rice. They don't all want to do that again. The U.S. and the United Kingdom, according to the Times of Israel, say that the Russian army is depleted, struggling to press the assault, seeking reinforcements. Ukraine will never be able to join NATO, concedes Zelensky in talks yesterday. Zelensky spoke to the British Parliament yesterday. Let's play cut 22 as the president of the Ukraine calls in a Zoom call to the British Parliament. Cut 22.
We have to fight the helicopters, rockets. The question for us now is to be or not to be. You all know this Shakespearean question. For 13 days, this question could have been asked, but now I can give you a definitive answer. It's definitely yes to be. And I would like to remind you the words that the United Kingdom have already heard, which are important again. We will not give up and we will not lose. We will fight till the end, at sea, in the air. We will continue fighting for our land, whatever the cost. We will fight in the forests, in the fields, on the shores, in the streets. I would like to add that we will fight on the banks of different rivers like Dnieper, and we are looking for your help, for the help of the civilized countries.
We'll hear more of this later today. Do not miss that special broadcast. Eastern European leaders arrived in Kyiv yesterday, 3 of them. The prime ministers of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovenia. Very, very brave trip on their part. The Washington Post says European leaders meet in Kyiv as besieged capital faces fresh attacks, dozens killed overnight in bombing. U.S. will join other NATO defense ministers seeking ways to bolster support for Ukraine. And the Ukraine war effort, according to the New York Times, shifts to Congress today. But those bonds are what are on a lot of people's minds. Russia owes 2 big bond payments today. If they pay in dollars, as they are supposed to, all will be well. If they pay in rubles, Russian credit will be ruined for a very long time. A historic debt default, says the Financial Times. Fitch warns Russia sovereign default if debt is paid in rubles. Nobody wants rubles. A little bit of domestic news. Pfizer and biotech are seeking authorization for a second booster shot for Americans 65 and older. Oh, that would be me. I'm all for that. The science shows it lasts 4 months. I had it more than 4 months ago. Give me another shot. Don't mandate anybody. Just say to everyone, okay, if you're 65 and older, you ought to get a second booster. We're back up, getting close to the R number of 1, meaning that sub-variant is moving around the United States. Stay safe. Get yourself another booster. We'll keep you posted. Very easy to do. They're going to make too much out of it. They're going to screw it up because it is Team Biden. Team Biden withdrew the nomination for the Fed's top bank cop, Sarah Bloom Raskin, after Joe Manchin said, nah, not going to happen. And if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, you're dismayed. I know some of you want Deshaun Watson because you don't care what he does in his private life. And look, it's possible he's innocent of every charge of sexual harassment. There are 23 of them, one of which was withdrawn by the woman. None of them resulted in criminal indictment. But tough, smart, accountable is allegedly the Cleveland Browns agenda. It's tough, smart, accountable, unindictable. And then Baker Mayfield posts basically a farewell message over on Instagram last night, which got onto Twitter. And I say to myself, what did the Browns do? This is the brownest things they've ever done. What is Jimmy Haslam doing? What is Dee Haslam doing? Flying down to Houston to try and trade the future of the franchise for a guy who did not play last year, who's going to be suspended by the NFL in all likelihood, who may very well have assaulted 1 to 23 different women that we know of in 3 different states. I went back and read all the allegations. I don't know. You don't know. The court system doesn't know. It's going to take years to figure out. Maybe he'll try and buy them off if he signs a $40 million contract. The face of the Browns, Baker Mayfield, apparently coming to an end. So that was bothering me last night. And then I started listening to some of the late reports from the war. And NATO ministers are getting together today to talk about what do we do if chemical weapons are used. And of course, they're going to talk about what do we do if Vladimir Putin uses a tactical nuclear weapon. By tactical, it means a low-yield weapon that would destroy a city or a suburb, but would not be as big a mushroom cloud as Hiroshima or Nagasaki. I mean, has it crossed your mind? Have you thought about it? Have you thought about it since 1962? During the entire Reagan years when I was in Washington, D.C., and I never thought about it, not during W, and our invasions, not during Obama, not during Trump. Only now, with an increasingly desperate Putin entering into a phase where everything is stuck, he has to revert to loss of face or some kind of admission of defeat. And honestly, first time in a long time. I'd like to know what you thought. 1-800-520-1234. Is there a non-significant chance of the use of nuclear weapons? Or is it actually to the level where you actually have to think about it for the first time since 1962? The use of nuclear weapons. I really did last night. I was thinking to myself, who knows what Putin is capable of? He's just killing women and children, and scores of schools and hospitals have been hit. You begin to wonder what would stop him. Is he that mortally afraid of embarrassment? Back America, Hugh Hewitt live from the West Coast today. 2 American journalists have been killed in Ukraine to date, among them Pierre Zakrzewski, a cameraman for Fox News. We know that Benjamin Hall is injured as well. I don't know the extent of his injury. Joining me now is Leland Vittert, many years with Fox News, now the anchor for News Nation Now. Good morning, Leland. How are you?
Hey, Hugh. Good morning.
Tell us about Pierre. I know you worked with him.
An incredible man, cameraman by trade, but he turned into a photographer, a producer, a video editor, equipment repairman, phenomenal friend, occasional therapist in war zone to war zone. And when I worked with Pierre during my 4 years overseas, what was incredible is that 2 things were true when you showed up at a story with Pierre, which is number one is wherever the story was, he had already been there. He already knew more about the story than you did. We like to say as young foreign correspondents that Pierre probably had forgotten more about war than we would ever know. And 2, he had this incredible smile that brought a sense of calm and relaxation to the most dangerous of situations. And it was pretty incredible that oftentimes when the rest of us would sort of have our hearts in our throats and want to scream, Pierre had a chuckle because he had been through so many situations like that before and was able to help so many of us through whatever situation we were in.
You know, Leland, I've talked to people like Dexter Filkins, John Fisher Burns, Tom Ricks, and they are always full of accolades for the team that supports them. They're the face, they're the writer, they're you, the person in front of the camera, etc. For every you, for every John Fisher Burns, there's a Pierre, and I hope I'm saying Zach Wazowski correctly. If I'm not correct,
Zach Chevsky.
Zach, say it first again.
Zach Chevsky.
Zakchevsky, thank you. Pierre Zakchevsky is the cameraman who died, and obviously we've got other journalists injured over there, Benjamin Hall among them. I don't know what it's like to be in a war zone, but it must be just a constant grind, Leland.
It really is, and I think it speaks to Pierre's moral courage, and I use that those words with deference to what it means. But Pierre understood the risk. There's a lot of guys out on what we used to call the circuit, going from war zone to war zone, who are the glory hounds, who enjoy the adrenaline rush and living out there. He wasn't like that. He understood, and now more than ever, that having somebody there on the ground to tell the truth and to see what was happening and report that back mattered, that there was value in that, and that it was important for the world to see through unfiltered eyes what was happening. And he believed in that. And he believed in that higher calling. And as we talked about Pierre yesterday with friends, the one thing that kept coming back to is Pierre died doing something that he knew was really and truly important, and he truly cared about it. And he'd been out there for 20 plus years. He was back in Afghanistan all the way back before 9/11, covering
the war correspondents from Ernie Pyle forward. War correspondents know what to do, and there's a fallen journalist memorial underway. Congressman David Dreyer, former congressman, organizing it. I hope it picks up momentum to honor people like this. Leland, how do you figure out what's going on? I consult the Financial Times and the Telegraph. I go to the Times of Israel, of course, the big newspapers in the United States, the major news sources. But it's all a fog of war. How do you figure out what to tell your audience every night?
You make a great point that there is an enormous fog of war that has really come across what is going on in Ukraine. And I think at least for us, we spend a lot of time trying to talk to people on the ground. And I think about my old fixer from when I was in Ukraine in 2014, who's now a member of parliament, Sviat Urash, who I talk to quite often to try to understand what's really happening on the ground. And I think you'd probably agree with this, that if you take all your sources from the FT, the Telegraph, the Times of Israel, major papers here, the television networks, on and on and on, you get a sense after a while of being able to distill that down to something of what the ground truth is. And it's normally somewhere in the middle, and is always a lot more confusing than any one outlet wants to make it out to be. So,
Leland, I want to ask you, I want to explain my theory. I think by having the prime ministers of the Eastern NATO country fly to Kyiv, then he talked to the UK Parliament. He saved the United States Congress for last because the United States has acted last at every step. And most recently, we've stopped the MiG-29. Does Biden feel pressure after today's address by Zelensky to up aid to Ukraine?
At least what we understand is that he is going to up aid to Ukraine in terms of dollars. That's one of the things the White House is going to try to announce. We were talking, it feels as though very much that President Biden has brought back the Obama administration foreign policy of leading from behind. Yes. And that certainly, if you think about Boris Johnson, has been way, way out farther than President Biden has been in terms of talking about Putin and helping Zelensky. It is puzzling to me. Think whatever you want of the White House's policy, but it is puzzling to me how the extremes that the White House goes to telegraph and to be public about the pains they go to not provoke Vladimir Putin, and they keep saying it over and over and over again. And that it's clear that's their overarching principle. Yeah.
Leland, it's appeasement. I'm listening to the biography of Churchill put out by Andrew Roberts, and I'm in 1934. It's just appeasement. Leland Vittert on Twitter, on television every night, News Nation Now anchor. Leland Vittert on Twitter. Come back for hour number 2 of today's Hugh Hewitt Show.
Man, save the world. Will you
Welcome back, America. That's John Androsik talking about Vladimir Zelensky, who will be addressing the United States Congress in an hour and a half, carried live over all of these Salem-affiliated shows. Let me ask my guest, Congressman Mike Gallagher, about the address. You know, Mike, if it was any other week, I'd talk to you about how do you repair a relationship with a quarterback, because the Browns have totally screwed up Baker Mayfield. It's a disaster. But more importantly, you're going to hear from a hero today. What do you expect to hear? How do you expect Congress will react?
Well, I will not take advantage of this opportunity to talk about the Baker Mayfield fiasco and the way in which he poured his soul out on Twitter last night. I will not talk about that, Hugh, because we have more important things at hand. I expect Zelensky to be very direct about what he needs right now. I understand that he's unlikely to convince people on the no-fly zone aspect, but there still remains much support we can give him, particularly as Russia escalates to attack supply lines near the Polish border. It becomes more important that we think creatively about how we can continue the flow of javelins, stingers, sniper rifles, things like that. I would also like to hear him address head-on the MiG-29 fiasco. Perhaps it's too late to convince the Biden administration to change course, but I don't know. If he can lay out how his pilots are ready to use these aircraft and what a big difference they will make and why it's so essential in light of the fact that we're not going to impose a no-fly zone, perhaps we in Congress can put bipartisan pressure on the Biden administration. And I would say, regardless of how you feel about that decision, whether you were for or against it, the way the Biden administration did it was very counterproductive. It made us look weak, signaling. The Secretary of State signaled that we were in favor of it. Then the Secretary of Defense signaled the opposite. And then ultimately the president himself vetoed the decision. That was a disaster, Hugh. And that really undermined what little credibility.
It's a red line kind of moment that we'll look back on and say, oh, gosh, they blew that. But this is Team Obama. I got to play for you. Last hour, Secretary of State Blinken went to his safe space on NPR. I like Steve Inskeep a lot. He's been a guest on the show. He writes good books. NPR, if they all were like Steve Inskeep, it wouldn't be a radical left-wing organization like it is. But in any event, Tony Blinken goes to talk to Steve Inskeep, and he says this, reverting to Davos speak to reputational damage in Africa. That's so Aspen Institute. That's so Munich Security Conference. That's so out of touch with the reality of a war in Ukraine. What do you say to that?
This is the reason we are in this crisis, because it's mirror imaging. It's strategic narcissism. It's them thinking that people like Xi Jinping and KGB thugs like Vladimir Putin play by the rules-based international order, which, along with history having sides, is a phrase we should retire, because history, of course, does not have sides. It's forged by human beings, usually with hard power. This isn't a model UN conference, okay? I don't understand why they continue to fall into this trap. And the Biden administration, it's the same naive belief that led the Biden administration to share intelligence with China in the naive hope that they could pry them away from Russia. But of course, they turned around and just shared that with the Russians. I don't see them abandoning their man in Moscow anytime soon. Indeed, the harder this gets for Putin, the more dependent he becomes on China as a market for energy sales, as well as a source of weapons and materiel and financial support. So this is the alliance of authoritarians that will be an enduring feature of the new Cold War.
Okay, I'm going to help you out here, Congressman. I'm going to help you out here. I was on Brett Baer's show on Monday night, and I used the phrase, the alliance of tyrants. It sounds better. Right, just use alliance of tyrants. It's got some alliterative use.
I like that. Well, trio of tyrants is a phrase I heard you say.
I also use that on Brett. You can steal that one, too.
I'm going to steal it. I will not give you credit. Here's what we can do.
Do we get a draft choice? We're going to need some draft choices because the Browns are about to give everything in the closet away for a guy with 22 allegations of assault against women. Don't get me started. Let's go back to Ukraine. I actually think the explanation for Blinken is very simple. Secretary Blinken, like Deputy Secretary Sherman, they spend all their time in Washington, D.C., all their time in this fake world. This world doesn't exist. It is model UN land, Mike Gallagher.
Well, there's another layer with Blinken, I think, where you have a former Secretary, John Kerry, working out of Foggy Bottom, pursuing this reckless climate change agenda, which is built on this premise of, well, we can't provoke China, we can't get tough because we need them to come to COP26 and sign meaningless statements. Hugh, I would say there are things we can do here, right? If the Chinese...
Stop for a second. COP26 makes me laugh because that's exactly how they think. They got 30 people running around worried about COP26 as opposed to 26 clicks from Kyiv.
It reminds me of this report earlier this week that they brought a bunch of TikTok influencers to the White House to push the narrative that Putin is to blame. There's something about the left where it's all about the performance of the thing and the virtue signaling as opposed to the actual policy. It's crazy, Hugh. We need to be publishing any information we have about if China starts sending military equipment to Russia in the form of satellite images or equipment captured on the battlefield. We can also ban the export of any semiconductor equipment and design software of any kind to China as a sanction if they do this. So there are ways in which we can get tough on China, but I think we just need to recognize these regimes for what they are and for the de facto alliance that they are in against the West. They have launched this new Cold War against the West. It is upon us. Now we must fight back in order to win.
The trio of tyrants is Khamenei, Xi, and Putin, and they are all there is no international rules-based order because they don't believe in it. So if we believe in it and they don't believe in it, it doesn't exist. It's Harvey the Rabbit. Congressman, what is your understanding of what is actually going on? The Ukrainians are saying they're in counteroffensive mode this morning. Fog of war stuff. We have no idea, but maybe you've heard. Is there any hope that they might actually now advance through the holes in the lines that they've punched in the Russian columns?
I think it depends on what part of the country and what axis of advance we're talking about. I think part of the reason the Russians experienced so many difficulties is because they basically launched a three-front war. I think in the south is where we're seeing the most Russian progress and a steady consolidation of gains, but their advance on Kyiv and Kharkiv remains stalled. What we're not hearing, Hugh, and even what we're not hearing in sort of official briefings we're getting, is the capacity of the Ukrainian military, or as well as certain paramilitary or spontaneous insurgent forces, to continue to fight. They've been fighting bravely. The Russians clearly got punched in the gut, but we don't have any sense of how long the Ukrainians can continue this or whether they can exploit their advances. And I fear that our vision, of the battlefield that we're largely getting from Twitter is distorted because of the understandable pro-Ukrainian sentiment. And I fear, Hugh,
of course it is.
Even if Vladimir Putin were to sue for peace today because he recognizes he can't continue this or occupy the entire country, think about what he'll already have gained, right? He's not going to give back the Donbass. There's going to be some promise from Zelensky or some other Ukrainian government official not to join NATO in the future. There's a variety of concessions that Putin can already get out of this process. And I fear that the lesson that the Chinese will derive is if you invade a country, even if you're only partially successful, all the West is going to do is sanction you. And that may be worth suffering the economic costs for the sake of gaining certain territory, even if it's not all of Taiwan. It could be some islands associated with Taiwan. And so we're in a very dangerous moment right now. All the more reason to continue to provide Zelensky with the support that he needs so he can continue to impose costs on the Russians, as well as avoid any other self-induced errors like the MiG-29 fiasco, which, again, I just think is undermined.
Congressman, I want to... It's a disaster. And keep talking. I wanted to give you a chance, though, for 2 minutes. I have been listening to Andrew Roberts' biography of Churchill before going to sleep, which makes it very hard to go to sleep because it's so good. And I'm in 1934 right now, and he runs around the world making speeches warning about Hitler, and nobody listens to him. Is there, at some point, will defense spending on the United States pick up with the reality of the alliance of tyrants, the trio of tyrants? Are we going to get there?
Well, we got an increase last week, Hugh, but that was after wasting 6 months of the fiscal year, and operating under a continuing resolution, which was incredibly costly. And I think the closer we get to the election, the harder it will be. And the Democrats remain wedded to this approach of prioritizing things other than hard power. Even within defense spending, you're seeing the beginnings of the DEI bureaucracy take root in the Pentagon and the elevation of issues such as climate change and identity politics, as opposed to a pure and relentless focus on warfighting. The military has two basic functions. It's to fight and win wars, or to prepare to fight and win wars. And anything that distracts from those two functions is wasted money in the military. And we're seeing progressive politics find its way into the Pentagon, and it has absolutely no place. It's divisive. It's contributing to the politicization of the entire force, and in particular to the general and flag officer corps. That's what worries me going forward. Beyond the top line, which we need to increase, it's the infiltration of some of the worst elements of identity politics into the military, which ultimately distracts from warfighting, and we're losing our warfighting edge as a result.
You're on Intel. You can't tell us a lot, but there is a covert division of the CIA that has typically done work in theaters like Ukraine. Do we have any reason to believe that the Biden CIA is as aggressive as Mike Pompeo's CIA?
No, without getting into specifics, I'll just say that the Trump administration, and particularly with the influence of former Secretary Mike Pompeo and former CIA Director Mike Pompeo, loosened the rules of engagement on a variety of fronts. In some cases, for example, in cyber warfare, that was in partnership with Congress. What we've seen in the Biden administration is a move in the opposite direction, more risk aversion, more cooks in the kitchen as far as who gets to approve certain operations. And so I'll have to leave it at that, Hugh. But in general, yes, you're right. There's more risk aversion. And as a result, we're slowing down our ability to operate, whether it's in cyber or in physical space.
We have to win these November elections. Congressman Mike Gallagher, always a pleasure. Next week you can do Brown's therapy with me. I'm hoping that a quarterback can go home again, because you managed to do it with Aaron Rodgers. Maybe the Browns can figure out how to repair the Baker Mayfield thing. They are engaged on the dumbest thing I've ever seen the Browns do, and they've done a lot of dumb things. You make Johnny Manziel a smart move if they trade for Deshaun Watson. Welcome back. I'm Hugh Hewitt, America. Good morning to you. Yesterday, the Producer Price Index was released. It was up 0.8% from January, up 10% year over year. Brian Wesbury joins me, First Trust Portfolio Senior Economist. Brian, it just doesn't stop. They do not know how to stop this.
Right. They don't. And, this is what happens. Bad, I mean, I know this sounds like easy to say, but bad policy begets bad outcomes. So, you go back to the 1970s, we had higher taxes, more spending, more regulation, and we printed too much money. And the result was that not only did the U.S. economy take it on the chin with inflation, we had stagflation, slow growth plus high inflation, but when the U.S. economy takes it on the chin, the world takes it on the chin, and that's why these seem like people can blame all these little things, but really it emanates from the bad policy, from too much money printing, from too big of a government right here at home in the United States.
When you are Rome, and we are Rome, the new Rome, like ancient Rome, and you debase your currency, you debase the currency of the world. Let me play you President Biden at the White House yesterday, the kind of idiocy that we're getting out of the White House. Cut number 8.
After 4 years in a row of increasing deficits before I took office, we're now on a track to see the largest ever decline in the deficit in American history.
Okay, Brian Wesbury, we spent $7 trillion over 2 years in COVID-related expenditures and $2 of that trillion for infrastructure. That's just a nonsense statement. But he might believe it. That's what's scary. He might think he's working on the deficit.
Yeah, well, what's almost scarier to me is that there are voters that might believe that. There's been nothing normal that's happened in 2 years. So using all these regular phrases, we had a recession, I have more jobs created in this recovery. It wasn't a recession and it wasn't a recovery. It was a lockdown and it was an opening up. This is like saying after World War II, we just had the biggest drop in the deficit ever after the war was over. So we just had I don't agree with the shutdowns. We could talk about that all day, but we did it anyway. So it is water under the bridge. We spent money to fight a pandemic. Now it's going away. It has nothing to do with politicians or their proposals or their plans. And for all these politicians to stand there and act like they're the ones that did it, it's laughable. And the problem is there are a lot of voters out there who believe it.
I want to close on this note with you, Brian. I traveled with the fetching Mrs. Hewitt on vacation last week. Everywhere except America's airplanes and airports, the masks are gone. All that is because the federal government is last to the fire and first to the mistake. And it's like the rest of the country has moved on. Tony Fauci's been disappeared, but we're still wearing masks on airplanes. It just tells us the government never gets anything right on time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's pathetic when you think about what's going on. You can walk everywhere, go into any restaurant without a mask. You can go. You saw Kyrie Irving sitting.
Yep.
He's not allowed to play without a mask, without being vaccinated, but he can sit in the first row right by the team and watch the basketball game without a mask on. This is the insanity of the rules that we're experiencing, and I hope people. I don't know. How do you open people's eyes? I think
we're going to find out in November. Quick question for you. Yep. If Ukraine pays its debt on its sovereign bonds in rubles, which are worthless right now, what does that mean for the world? It's basically a default. What's it mean?
Yeah, it's a default. Russia and Ukraine, this is obviously a horrible situation, and talking about the economy almost seems ridiculous, but I will say this, and that is that Russia and Ukraine, they're big countries, lots of commodities, etc. But in terms of the impact on the global economy, it's relatively small.
All right, it's going to happen, but I'm looking at the European stock markets this morning. They're up almost 3% in France.
Right. Yeah, there's just not that much exposure. Maybe we'll find out that some big banks have more exposure than we think, but it doesn't look like it. The market's pretty good at ferreting that stuff out, and it's what it's saying now is that we can see an end to this, and it's going to be soon.
I was just about Germany's up 3.3%. France is up 3.41%. The British stock market up 1.25%. Do you think they smell peace?
Yes, I think I read I'm assuming what I'm reading is correct, but I read that there's a pushback. The Ukrainians are going on the offensive.
Right.
I hear more not calming, but words that say Vladimir Putin is looking for a way out, and I think he is. He's lost. He cannot win this. And the only question was he going to go nuclear or not? And it doesn't look like he is. So
I'm going to ask Senator Dan Sullivan about that at the top of the hour. Brian Wesbury, I hope you're right. Thank you for joining us, as always, from First Trust Portfolio in Chicago. Wise words, fair-minded, objective analysis from Brian Wesbury. Follow him on Twitter at Wesbury, no T, just Wesbury. Come back for hour number 3 of today's Hugh Hewitt Show. Vladimir Zelensky will be carried live across most of these stations at 9 a.m., followed by Mike Gallagher taking your calls in response. Do not miss this historic address as he rallies the free world to a free Ukraine. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Stay tuned. I'm Hugh Hewitt on the West Coast, awaiting the appearance of Vladimir Zelensky in front of the Congress of the United States. Joining me, Dan Sullivan, Senator from Alaska. Good morning, Senator. Great to have you on.
Good morning, Hugh. Great to be on.
Before we talk about Zelensky and Ukraine and serious things, I have to ask you, as a Browns fan, what do you think of Jimmy Haslam's bid to become the NFL's new Dan Snyder?
Yeah, the whole idea of saying we're going to get rid of Baker Mayfield, and, it's the perennial issue. You and I have talked about finding a franchise quarterback and sticking with him. Remember, he was injured a lot towards the end. I just don't get it. It makes no sense to me.
It makes no sense to me either. Let's hope it's all just smoke. Let's now get to the real smoke. There's smoke over Kiev, there's smoke over Kharkiv, but the Ukrainians say they've gone over to the offensive. Do you know anything about that, Senator?
Well, look, like a lot of senators, I've been very involved in trying to get the Ukrainians as much lethal aid as quickly as possible. By the way, as quickly as possible is one of the key issues. Hugh, as you know, our Pentagon can really drag its feet on some of these things. They get these drawdowns in tranches, and it just takes way too darn long. The Biden administration dragged its feet last fall in terms of getting them lethal military aid. I think we're going to hear a lot about that in the next hour from President Zelensky, but we need to be doing everything possible to enable him to win. And I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, although it's going to be tough. You know, you've talked about it, the Russian way of war. They're going to come in and they're just going to try to flatten Kyiv. And, you know, there's some courageous people right now inspiring the world. Zelensky is one of them, but the average average Ukrainian citizen, to me, is a sight to behold, fighting for freedom. It's remarkable.
You are too young to remember this, Senator, but in 1973, when the Yom Kippur War was on, I was a junior in high school, Nixon became so frustrated with the Department of Defense, he finally called in Henry Kissinger and James Schlesinger and said, send everything that can fly to Israel, full of weapons. Do you think Biden will get there? Send everything that can fly, fill them up with not just javelins, but high-altitude missiles that can take down the high-altitude bombers that are just indiscriminately hitting civilians. Will Biden get there?
I mean, what's happening, if you're watching, on so many issues, this president is not leading from the front, he's leading from behind. And think about it. Just go through the list, Hugh. Nord Stream 2, the SWIFT sanctions, banning Russian oil, MFN on Russian trade, the MiGs. What's the common theme? This president has had to be pushed either by Congress, and by the way, it's almost always a bipartisan group in Congress,
yes,
or by our European allies. They have not led on the front foot on any of these issues, including the lethal weapons. What I'm hoping is that Zelensky really, really makes this a key part of his speech in the next hour, and then the administration will act. But the administration has been acting almost on every major issue after being pushed by us and, believe it or not, by our European allies. Look, when you're being pushed by the Germans on energy and military equipment, you know something's going wrong.
Senator, I want to play for you Tony Blinken on NPR last hour because it is Aspen Institute speak. It's Davos speak, and it makes me crazy what the Beltway talks itself into. Listen to this. It's high school UN speak. It is the stuff of Washington seminar rooms. You know, wrong side of history. It's nuts.
So, Hugh, let me. What I've been telling these guys and what I've been talking about is that we need to be much more clear. It's not great power competition, right? This is the new era of authoritarian aggression, and it is dictators, too, Putin and Xi Jinping, increasingly working together, driven by historical grievances and paranoid about their neighbors, whether it's Ukraine or Taiwan, because they're democracies and they're willing to use force. You may have seen Congressman Mike Gallagher and I have put forward legislation called the Stand with Taiwan Act. This is the kind of clarity that we need. One of the lessons from Ukraine already is that comprehensive economic sanctions, financial sanctions, have the best chance of deterring conflict if they are clearly articulated before the conflict begins.
Yes.
Our bill lays out really comprehensive sanctions to crush the Chinese Communist Party leadership, key sectors of the Chinese economy, and it says, here's the sanctions. If you militarily invade Taiwan, here's where you're going to get crushed with. That's
Senator,
we need. That's the kind of clarity we need, not what you just heard from Tony Blinken.
The alliance of tyrants that you refer to has got a third junior partner in Khamenei, and they've got Maduro and they've got Kim Jong-un. The trio of tyrants is Khamenei, Putin,
trio. I like that.
And so those trio, they don't believe in this, quote, international rules-based order. They don't believe in the wrong side of history. They believe in themselves. At what point does the Biden administration wake up to this?
So, again, this should be a clarifying moment. You're exactly right. The trio of tyrants, what they believe in and what they react to is one thing. It's power, whether that's military power, whether that's unleashing the incredible power of American energy, not unilaterally surrendering it, which is what Biden has done the whole first term. And it is the power of our alliances. You know, we are a country that has deep, substantial allies. We're an ally-rich nation, and that trio of tyrants, they're ally-poor. These are American strengths, and it's what these guys respond to. It's not, UN speak. It's things like, all right, Soleimani, you're going to be in Iraq, reviewing the killing of more troops, we're going to kill you. That's the kind of thing that they Iran understand, and these leaders understand.
Jim Sciutto of CNN reported minutes ago that a senior U.S. official has told him that Soviet-era SA-8, SA-10, SA-12, and SA-14 mobile air defense systems are being given to Ukraine, which is great, I think, except they've got to be at least 30 years old. I'm not sure what they're going to work or if they're going to hit. Don't we have stuff that can hit high-range airplanes? I mean, I remember Vietnam, the Soviets gave the Vietnamese everything to kill Americans with, and it wasn't direct conflict.
Well, the Stingers are effective, but they're effective only to a certain altitude. I would say these SAM systems, they're old, but they're pretty darn effective at higher altitudes. And the reason those are important, and this is where, Hugh, we have to be calling on other NATO countries, particularly former Warsaw Pact NATO countries, to also surge as much as they can to Ukraine, is because the Ukrainians have trained on those mostly. But those SAM systems that you're referring to that are higher altitude than the Stingers are actually still quite effective.
I'm glad to hear that. Let me ask you about the MiG-29s. Can't Poland roll those up to the border like we did to Canada in 1940 and allow the Ukrainians to walk across and fly them away? I mean, how did we veto that?
Yes, you're exactly right. And, the point here, I was on the call with Zelensky about 10 days ago. He was talking about a no-fly zone. My view is give them all the weapons they have to create their own no-fly zone. And that's what he asked us for. And the MiGs are a part of that mix of weapon systems that can control the sky. But as you see, right now, it's what I mentioned earlier. The Biden administration is deterring itself. The point is to deter Putin. And right now, on this issue as well, they're dragging their feet.
It
sends exactly the wrong message to the guy we're supposed to be deterring.
The Biden administration is deterring itself. Well put, Senator Sullivan. Breaking news, Marco Rubio has put out a deep fake that Russia has Zelensky saying he's quitting. They're not quitting. Dan Sullivan's about to hear the real Zelensky as Congress gathers. Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Don't go anywhere, America. 1-800-520-1234.